Good evening, and welcome back to the Not So Perfect Bigfoot Show. So, last night we started the journey of Will Jevin. We outlined his life from the first time he had an encounter to standing beside a tree. I'm not going to say eye to eye, face to face, because it was a large creature, but there was not a lot of space between him. He went through his story, how he felt, how he reacted, and that was not his first incident with the thing we call Sasquatch. He had little tidbits of kind of teasers along the way, but it was that moment in Will's life he understood what he was dealing with, and it was that moment that defined him, that defined his life's work and his journey through life to investigate this creature. Even through the military, Will kept his passion up for the subject. Getting out of the military, he still went on hikes and research adventures with his friends. Some of them are very comical, but he has had the opportunity to experience things that we have only dreamed about experiencing. I think he is a wonderful guest. I think he has a very good story to tell. When we left off the last time, he was starting to send photos of his evidence to Renee Hendren, which became a very good friend. That is where we left off, right, William?
Yeah, I was actually still in the army at that time. Um, what really made that decision because I'd been sending things to John Green, and I felt because Green was the one putting books out, and he was documenting things. That's why I was sending things to him. And there was the incident above the town of Wilkinson, Washington, back in it would have been 1979, and where two elk were torn apart by these things. So I went up there and found where this happened, took pictures of the tracks, and I sent the pictures to John Green. And his response was like they always were. They were, yeah, those were good pictures, and that was kind of it. And then we had taken him previously to before we went in the service to the Clark Ranch near Roy, Washington, and he drives down from British Columbia, picked a few of us up. We went out to the ranch. The scream started up almost immediately. And after maybe 10 minutes, we loaded back up in the van and he left. And I just kind of, it was the accumulation of these things where there wasn't a whole lot of follow up or interaction about these things that were going on, the pictures, the incidents, the screams, etc. And I just thought it just didn't seem like this was the right place to be sending all this material. It was like going into a black hole. There was nothing happening with it. So Renee DeHinden and I had been friends also, since I met the two of them in 1975 together, which I think was the last time the two of them actually went to any place together. Um, I felt, communicating with Renee that he was more interested in things that were happening in the field. So I started sending things to him, and he was working with me, telling me what he thought and things that he'd learned along the way, through his journey. And he really took me under his wing and taught me what he knew.
Well, it has to be very disappointing where you found what we would call a hot spot where there's active howling or screaming, and you have someone that you have really looked up to and you've really worked hard to get them out there, and they step outside the van for a few moments, and there it was just pretty much I'm not going to say nonchalant, but it was like, okay, I'm done. That had to be very disappointing.
Yeah, and then years later, I was at his house with Bob Titmus, and we were all having lunch, and he makes the comment that, "Gee, I wished I would have taken a recorder with me to the Clark Ranch." And I thought, well, gee, you're the guy. I mean, you guys are the experts. You're the ones that should know how to do this stuff. When a witness says, "Hey, I've got something going on here right now," and you go there, you want to go prepared. And I just kind of felt like he didn't have that level of interest in it.
Well, before we move on with your story, your interactions with him or that night where it had to be a feeling of disappointment. And that's nothing against John Green. It really isn't. But as someone that really wanted him there as some guidance and someone that you really looked up to not come prepared, how did that shape you on how you do your research and your work?
Well, it started making me really look at people and kind of where they come from when dealing with certain situations or circumstances. And I thought to myself, well, I want to put myself in the shoes, having been a witness. I want to put myself in the witness's shoes. So, what do they expect from somebody like me coming there? And I realized, that neither Green nor DeHinden had ever seen one of these creatures. In fact, they never did, either one. But it's different when you've seen one yourself and then you go talk to another witness. And I hate to use the example, I do it, but because it's a good example, most people understand. But it's sort of like Alcoholics Anonymous. You can't really understand what someone else has gone through in a situation unless you've experienced it yourself. And the subject of Bigfoot is like that. And I've spoken with literally thousands of witnesses over many decades now, and they always come back and say, that really took a weight off my shoulders because you understood. We both experienced very similar things, and with many people, they really can't move forward, or it's hard for them to move forward unless they sort of get it off their shoulders. And so for me, it's been that's part of what I do is try to help people out, and get them past that moment where they had that traumatic experience. But when I go talk to somebody, I don't know if their story is legitimate or not. I'll give you an example. Um, Renee got a call one time when I was living in Vancouver, Washington, of some people in the Columbia River Gorge that had a sighting. It was a graduation party. I guess it would have been June. I don't recall what year it was. It was early '90s. But he says, "Well, I can't get down there right now. Would you mind going over since that's not far from where you live?" And I said, "Sure, I'll go over there." So I took some of my team members and we took our equipment and we went over to the place. And again, you don't know what you're getting into, so you want to be prepared. So the lady of the house answered the door, and we talked, and I told her who we were and what we were doing, and she says, "Oh yeah, sure, I'll tell you what happened." So we went outside and they had a small apple orchard, or a young apple orchard. The trees weren't real big yet, maybe, 10-foot tall trees. And and she says, "Well, we saw that we had all these kids over, maybe 100 kids over here for this graduation party last night. And, you know, there was this Bigfoot that came in." And I said, "Well, we're there." After she finished telling what she knew, she wasn't the actual witness. We determined that fairly quickly. I said, "Well, um, were there footprints or any other evidence?" And she sat down under this tree, and she spreads her arms wide. She says, "Oh yeah, if you sit here long enough and look, you'll see these." And my staff members, we had the board of directors for the. I had reconstituted the PCSIT in Vancouver. Only then we called it the Pacific Coast Sasquatch Investigations Team instead of the Pierce County. Um, they could tell that I was kind of turning red and getting a little more than frustrated at the situation. So one of our directors, he come over and he puts his arm on my shoulder and he says, "Come on, Willie, let's go over here and talk to the teenagers." So our lady who was our kind of our PR person, she was very good with people. Carol, she stayed there and talked to the lady. So I went over and talked to her son and one of the other teenagers. They were the ones who actually encountered the creature. They were having a conversation, and the party was kind of loud, so they walked away towards the river, and their property was right on the Columbia River. And they'd walked away so they could have a little quieter conversation. And that's when the creature approached them and got very close and scared the heck out of them. So sometimes you have to walk into a situation with an open mind, and then sometimes the situation evolves. So that's kind of how I approach things.
Well, you had collected stories since a young age. And even at a young age, people were coming to you for your experience and your information.
They were.
So you have a wealth of information on emotions and how people react and how to interview people. What is the best technique you can use when you're interviewing someone that is very closed and reserved, but they need to tell their story?
Well, I used to carry. I used to carry. I don't do have it anymore, but I used to carry what I called my show and tell book, and I had a binder with a bunch of pictures and different items that would help me explain to them like what I had seen. For example, and I'll give another example. This was in 1989. Um, living in Vancouver. Like I had mentioned, on the previous episode that I moved to Vancouver in the mid '80s after I left the service, and Green and Hinden both told me they thought that was great because I was the first real Bigfoot hunter to be there since Roger Patterson. And listeners should understand, it's not hunting Bigfoot with a gun. It's like you hunt for your car keys. That's what we originally called ourselves. We're Sasquatch hunters because we were out there searching for him. So I sat down on the front porch this beautiful June morning. The sun was out. I thought, wow, it's nice. I went out to get the newspaper and I sat down on the front steps and it was folded in half. So I'm looking at the headlines. Then I flip the paper over, and here's this big article with a picture of these two people. They'd had a Bigfoot sighting just a few days prior, and I thought, oh wow, it's not far from here. And but then I thought, oh, it's on the front page of the paper. There's probably been all kinds of people out there, but I thought, I'm going to go talk to these people anyway. So I took my little show and tell book and my camera, and I headed out to the town of Yacolt that was just north of Vancouver. And I pulled up to the yard, and I walked up and introduced myself to people outside. And I said, well, there's probably been a lot of people. I'm sure you've been harassed by lots of people. Would you mind telling me what happened here? So they're like, sure, come on in, we'll tell you. And we sit down, and what happened? The story was the lady of the house and her 16-year-old son were sitting there, and she was going to go out and ride the horse. They just moved there from Wisconsin. They were city people. Had bought 13 acres there, and were trying country life. So they she was putting on her boots, and they heard a noise outside where the corral was, and she asked her son Nick to go out and check the horse, make sure he wasn't his hoofs weren't tied up into the rope. So he goes out there, and if you picture the how it looked, there was a tree line on the left side of their house that went down to these lower fields, and it was pasture on the right. So he looks down through the corral along this tree line, and he thinks he sees a person walking away from the corral. So he runs down there to see who this person was. He gets almost to where this individual was walking, less than 50 feet away, and he slips on something on the ground and falls down, makes a bunch of noise. Well, the Sasquatch turns around at this noise, and he said, Nick told me that he said its head kind of went back like in surprise, and its eyes got big. Then it leaned forward like it was getting a better look at him, and spread its arms out 45-degree angles, palms facing, and starts walking towards him. And of course, this kid from Milwaukee, I think is where they were from, had no idea of any kind of wildlife. So he gets up and he runs like heck to the house. And he throws on a different pair of boots to get better traction, he said, and he went running back out again. Well, by this time, the creature had turned around and resumed its course. And this time it heard him coming, and it turned around and come barreling after him. So he ran back to where they had an outbuilding by the corral, and he climbs up on this outbuilding, and the creature stood there for a time watching him, like it was making sure he wasn't going to come back. And after a bit, it turned and it resumed its course yet again in that same direction. So I asked the people, what did all these other people who came here claiming they were, Bigfoot researchers or whatever, what did they ask you? Well, they asked us for the story. They looked for footprints and scat. And after that, they left. And I said, really? I said, didn't anybody want to go down in the pasture and find out where the creature was going? They said, no, nobody was interested. I said, well, is it okay if I go down there and look? And he said, sure, we'll take you down there. So we all went down along the tree line, and Nick showed me where the creature was and where he fell and all this stuff. So we went all the way down to where there was a small intermittent creek, and then the pasture went up slightly beyond that. Well, in the upper pasture, there was a big full size cottonwood tree that had blown over the previous winter, and to the on the upper side of the root wad, there was a like an intermittent pond where water would collect there during the winter. So that was kind of void of grass or anything. It was just dirt. And I found two sets of juvenile tracks in that dirt. And I said, there you go. That's why each time the creature kept going the same way, and it was trying to keep young Nick from going down there. And the people were very impressed with that. I mean, I'm always trying to think of, you know, it's sure, it's fun to find tracks and all that kind of stuff, but to me the bigger question is, why is it there and why is it doing what it's doing?
The why.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you were saying that it turned around and it made the gesture with the hands and leaned forward, that's almost like I'm coming at you, bro. You better stop. It's almost like a warning. But
It was, yeah.
he went inside, put on different boots, come out, and at that point,
And the creature was already it was already going back its original direction.
what I get out of that is this creature had him. Yeah, I mean it had him, but he wanted no part of this young man. He
Yeah,
just wanted to leave.
he was just trying to keep him away from the young ones.
Exactly. And then when the young one or the young male come back out, he ended up having to climb on the building. It watched him for a while to make
It's
sure
like you again.
he made sure he got the message this time.
Absolutely, yeah.
That is uh, is protective, but it's also a nurturing aspect when you look at the fact that it had young around, and you probably would not have pieced that together had you not found those tracks.
Oh yeah. And about a month later, well, I told the family, I said, well, there's probably a female with this group also, at least, maybe more, but I said, we know there's two juveniles. You saw this male, and there's probably a female and maybe other ones, so keep your eyes open. So about a month later, I was in bed getting ready for work the next day, about 11 o'clock at night, and I get this frantic call from the family, and they had this big porch light outside of their side yard, and they were excitedly telling me that there was this grayish female that was there, and they were describing it in minute detail, and it was just staring at the house. And so I threw my clothes on and I raced out there, and we did find 16-inch footprints in the flower bed that were about 4 inches deep, and we watched two sets of eye shine for quite a while out in the fields. But I told them, I said, well, that's what I told you was going to happen. But I said, don't go beyond the fence line. That's their area. This is your area. And that investigation went 9 months. I even wrote a book about it called Haunted Valley. Yacolt was the Native American term for that area, and it translated into Haunted Valley. So that's why I called the book that. But the area had a long history of stuff, and that was kind of a, going back to Renee DeHinden, I called him, I don't know how many times, to come down there. I said, if you want to see a Sasquatch in your lifetime while you're still here, this is the place to do it. And unfortunately, he kind of dragged his heels until the creatures had left the area, but they were there for a solid 9 months. And just about everybody I took up there saw at least one of them.
Other than the obvious, what are the different characteristics between a male and a female? And to follow up to that, do you think the females have the potential to be as aggressive or protective as a male can be?
Oh, absolutely. It can be as aggressive. I don't think there's a lot of physical characteristics that are that different, other than, you know, the presence of breast. But um, there was an old story from Bob Titmus that Larry Batson, he actually got the story from Bob, and then he wrote it. Um, but the story it was happened a few years before Patterson got the film, so it must have been around 1964, in that very same area, not far from where they got the film. In fact, uh, Titmus was in there by himself, and he got back in that country, and he was back in there too late. So his reasoning for not trying to leave was he didn't want to get hurt trying to get out in the dark. So what he did was he decided to hunker down till daylight, and he found a small area where he could lay in and then cover himself with leaves and go to sleep for the night. And he estimated it was around 1 in the morning. He heard this noise, all this noise happening, and apparently, um, afterwards, he figured out by looking at the footprints it was the same creature that was in the Patterson film. But this thing came in there, and he said it was like a locomotive, breaking brush, screaming, raising holy hell, sniffing the area, and it knew he was there, but it couldn't find him. And so, I mean, that's kind of a little insight to how aggressive even the females are.
When it comes to their oath factors, do you think they have a higher sense sense of smell than we do?
Well, my own experience being, a cavalry scout in the army was, our job was to be out at night and to sneak and peek, go find the bad guys, and then collect as much information as you can on them without being detected. So you do a lot of training for that, and part of that training is, after you're out there a while, your senses definitely heighten, so you can smell and hear and see things you normally wouldn't, because we're so bombarded in society and daily life with stuff that our senses kind of deaden a little bit to that, so our brains aren't overwhelmed. But when you're out a while, your senses definitely pick up. And I think because they live out like that all the time, they do have a little more heightened senses. Not super sense of smell. No primate has a super sense of smell like dogs do. But the big difference, and I've talked about this on my own show a number of times, where and it's something in college they talked about. I majored in psychology, and during the neurobiology courses, they talk in great detail about how your nervous system works and senses and things like that. When we were talking about senses, everybody always says, well, a dog's sense of smell is really superior to humans. It is in one respect, and that's because of the long snout. They have a lot more nerve receptors there to pick up minute particles of smell, right? But people that say that never look at the other side of the coin. And I remember the professor talking about how with humans, obviously don't have as great of capacity to pick up those small, minute particles. However, we can identify more than 50,000 different scents, very minute differences between scents, and identify those, where a dog can't do that. A dog's, good for maybe a dozen or so, differences. So the Sasquatch is probably very similar to that, to what human capacity is.
So when I used to train dogs, I used to train them for law enforcement, and I would tell the new handlers that when you walked in your grandma's house and you could smell soup cooking, you're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, grandma's cooking some vegetable soup. But a dog's olfactor, when they walked in, they could smell the corn and the beef
Oh,
and the
sure.
cheese, the ingredients.
Mm-hmm.
I just always thought that was a good analogy.
Right, right.
But moving on, well, I have had the pleasure since I started my little YouTube and Rumble channel to speak with a lot of people, and one of the common occurrences that I get with someone that has them actively on their property, they've all have moved onto the property, and they have been, I, for lack of better words, and this is just my synopsis, and we both know you know far more than I do. So I would really like your opinion on it. What I assessed by these stories is that when they moved in and they were getting yelled at or they were getting rocks thrown at them, especially the ones that had, the large breed dogs. My assessment was the Bigfoot were watching them and learning their behavior to see how
Hmm.
they would react or if they were a threat. Do you have any thoughts on that?
If they're moving into property, and we've got one in Arkansas happening right now, family moved in there, and these all these things started happening. Rocks being thrown and all that. And I told the people, I said, what they're trying to do is they're counting heads. They want to see how many people are there. That's their first thing. And it's never a good thing, especially if they see small children. It's never a good thing when they're coming in that aggressive. So, um, and sometimes you never know what they take as a slight. These things have really short tempers. My police friend in Texas, he told me a story with this family he knew, and this wasn't that long ago. They had a bull mastiff, and they were out doing some gardening in the yard one day, and the dog went racing off to the tree line, and it didn't. Apparently, the dog didn't realize what was there until it was too late, and the Sasquatch grabbed the dog in front of the family, tore the dog in half, and threw both halves at the family.
Oh
Um,
goodness.
that's pretty gruesome, but and they had no idea. I mean, apparently they did something that angered the thing, and that was its response. Um,
I mean, that's a good point because we were speaking earlier, and when Fred Roll was on the show, he mentioned about the dogs being slammed against the trees, like sort
hmm
of like Jello. And I also had a gentleman in Alabama where that happened to one of their dogs, and if that don't send terror into you, but what do you do? Not everyone can afford to move.
Well, and I've helped a lot of people with this. There's some simple methods. In nature, smell is one of the big factors. Whoever has the stronger smell kind of has charge of the location. So what I've told people, the first real step, there's a couple of things you do on your property. If you move into a place, you need to cut back any kind of brush at least 50 feet away from the house, because these guys like to use um, foliage, to cover their movements. And they'll do strange things like, they'll test motion sensor lights to see when it trips them. But the big thing to start with again is cutting the brush back. The second thing would be pouring bleach around a perimeter that you don't want them to come past. And in the situation in Arkansas, when the people first contacted me, I told them to do that. They went out the same day, did that, and the creatures raised hell about it, but it had the desired effect. They didn't come past that boundary anymore. Um, so that's very important. I mean, I've had people as far away as Australia contact me for help in these kind of situations, these really bad escalating situations, and I tell them to do the same thing, and it works every time.
Well, the bleach would overwhelm their O factors. Is that the
Absolutely. What's stronger than any scent they would leave.
Oh, very interesting. So, as you're collecting these stories and you're starting to get more data, you're still in touch with, Renee and John. You're out of the military by now.
Hmm.
Where did your life go from there, and how did you continue to follow your pursuit to learn more about this creature? But also, you went to college, you got married at some point.
Hmm.
How did that intertwine with your life?
Well, um, you learn real fast that you can't do too much with Bigfoot, otherwise you lose a relationship that you value very highly, and that happened to me in Vancouver. The woman I was with, I loved her more than anything, and then um, I paid too much attention to Bigfoot. I mean, I don't know what year it was, 88. Knott's Berry Farm just happened to be in the Portland, Vancouver area. And I worked for the state school for the deaf at the time, and I was working graveyard. So when I got home, she told me that this lady came from Knott's Berry Farm, and so I called the lady and I said, sure, I'll talk to you. And they had created or they were in the process of creating something they called Bigfoot Rapids, and it was I want to say it was a 10-acre site, and they were recreating the Pacific Northwest with all the trees and vegetation, and they had this large whitewater ride that you went on in rafts. And what they wanted from me was they created a ranger station, and they wanted footprint casts and information in there so people attending could go through and be educated on the subject. And so I told the lady when she came to the house, before she walked up the first step, I said, if this is going to be nonsense, you can turn around and go back to your car and leave. I won't talk to you. And she says, no, 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 we want to make this totally credible. So I went ahead with the project, and both Green and Dehin, and they were excited about it. And they told me I was the first person that was ever paid to do anything with Bigfoot. And this wasn't that long after Harry and the Hendersons come out, but I know the guy who was a consultant for that, and I don't believe he was paid. Green and Dehin both told me I was the first person ever paid to do anything, by any company like this. And so, I mean, it was a fun project, but I think my girlfriend really felt ignored, and we split up, and that was really a hard lesson for me. And I tell people all the time, because people fall victim to this subject all the time, where they just devote everything to it. I tell them, look, you got to have moderation. I've done this almost 52 years now, and the reason I have staying power that most people don't, they come in they burn hard real fast, and then they burn out. They end up leaving the subject. Is that you have to pace yourself. You can't just, as Renee used to say, I'm going to go out and grab one by the backside, his hair by the backside, and drag him in. Well, you're not going to do that. it's impossible. So you have to pace yourself.
Wow, I feel bad for bringing that up now. I can still kind of feel the emotion in the
Yeah, it's
express
you learn a hard lesson sometimes in life, and that was just one of them.
Let's go to a happy subject,
Okay.
because I am so sorry I brought that up.
But the work in the area was great, because when the occult thing happened in '89, I mean, I had been following tracks there since the mid '80s, and then I started picking up patterns, and it is different for different regions, but that one it made it almost easy. I was able to track that particular group throughout the entire year. I knew what part of the region, and they occupied a 3,300 square mile area. That one
Mm.
group did, but I could predict within 30 days where they were going to be. Maybe not exactly where they were going to be. I'd have to do some extensive searches, but through witnesses and things that I would find, I started piecing that pattern together, and they would move in a clockwise pattern throughout that entire region. I learned later, after I moved out of the area years later, that group did cross the Columbia River and the occupied part of northern Oregon too. So they had quite an extensive area. That one group of 4 individuals.
Was this an aggressive group?
They weren't. I mean, they would do things like they were in. They were south. They were south of, or actually just due east of Vancouver, right around October, deer hunting season, and there was a family. Actually, they were neighbors of friends of mine, and I happened to meet one of the neighbors, and one after I was out looking around, and he'd actually seen one of the creatures himself. This guy was a retired Marine Corps intelligence officer, so he had a lot of credibility. And I just struck up a conversation with him out by the road, and he said, "Yeah, I come out to get my mail one day, and out across this field over here, I see this thing walking across the tree line." And he was telling me about the family next to him, and they were avid hunters. They would hang deer and elk in this shed they had. Well, this group of four creatures every single year would come in there and try to get the animals, the meat out of that shed. And they ended up having to lock it up and had a really hard time keeping them out of that. Uh, I think they eventually shot at them because they scared some of the teenagers that were there one afternoon. But other than that, I never heard of any kind of aggression from that particular group.
Well, that would go into my next question. And let me tell you what I think about it and what my opinion is, and then you can correct me, okay?
Okay, sure.
um, I always people ask people, what is your end game? And most people say to give them protection or to give land for protection. I myself think some things are better left alone. I do not think they need our protection. I do not think we have plenty of forest reserve. But I think as people, every time we get involved in something or we touch something, we end up in some way it backfires on what we're trying to protect.
Right, absolutely.
So what is your end game and do you think they need protection?
I don't think they do. No.
Amen.
Um,
Thank you, sir.
yeah, no, I don't. I don't. I mean, the argument people have made, oh, they need the Endangered Species Act. No, they don't. Well, if and when they are proven to be the real thing out there, which they eventually will be, and I talked to someone from the Forest Service years ago that was her expertise was the Endangered Species Act, and she told me that um, when if that happens, that automatically kicks into gear anyway. So it's not something that people need to go out and try to get done. It will happen automatically. But I just don't think it needs to happen because their population is quickly on the rise, and there isn't a whole lot people are doing to hurt them.
Do you think if by chance they were recognized and put on the endangered list, and this is my biggest, and this is just me thinking out the box because of my background. Do you think that at some point the government will come in to these farmers and say you can live on the land, but you can't farm it because you have the perfect environment for a Sasquatch? Do you think
No,
that
I
the
don't
government
think
may
so.
or may not?
You know, I know a lot about the government stuff. I can't talk a lot about it, but because I've been made privy to a bunch of this stuff. Um, Usually they don't do anything, but if there's a bad situation, and again, I'll use a story of something that happened as an example. I talk about my police friend in Texas. He's keeps his eye on a lot of things that go on, and has seen the creatures himself a few times. But one of his friends had a ranch, and I think it was just across the border into Texas from New Mexico. The situation that happened, he was out watering his tomatoes one day with a hose, and one of these things walks by right through his yard, and instinctively he squirts it with the hose, and it took off running. So now he ended up having to go away on a business trip. He was gone, I think, for a month or so. When he comes back, and he went to his room to take a nap. When he woke up, this thing is standing over his bed. It somehow had gotten into the house, and when it saw him
Oh,
open his eyes, it proceeded to thrash him, threw him around like a rag doll. And this guy, he was a big guy. I think he was 6'4", 6'5". And at one point during this melee, he apparently got one of his hands close to its mouth, and it bit a finger off,
oh
and then
my
threw him
word.
against the wall and knocked him out. And then how my buddy found out was he gets a call from the guy at the hospital. So he goes racing out to the hospital to see him, and there was people, and these people aren't from any specific agency. Sometimes they're made up of people from different agencies, but um, I can't even.
Hmm.
I won't describe what these people are, but they were there, and he'd already had a run in with a couple of these guys as a cop, from an incident that happened to him when we were on the phone. I mentioned these guys came there and basically told them that they couldn't talk about this stuff, otherwise their police agency would lose federal funding. And he actually got uh, taken off duty for a couple of weeks without pay because of this. And all he did was, he went out to where I think I mentioned the kid on the bicycle and that incident, and they went out and I was talking or texting back and forth with them when they encountered these things. So these guys knew about this. They were in the area, so they told him to basically cease and desist and don't talk about it no more. And he's pretty bullheaded, so he ended up getting kind of to kind of know one of these two guys. Um, so they were there at the house, and they told him. They said, "Well, what are you doing here?" And he said, "Well, that's a friend. This is a friend of mine's house, and this is my jurisdiction, so I come out to see what's going on." And they told him, they said, "Well, you can go and look around, but you can't take pictures." So he went in the house. The house was completely destroyed. Um, and what ended up happening, he told me later, and this was several months later, that the government basically forced the guy to sell his property to them at pennies on a dollar, and he was forced to leave. And the guy's passed away since then. So um, I have heard a few stories like that. They're not stories you're going to hear out in the open. It's, you have to know somebody that like this knew the person when this happened. But I have heard a few of these like this. It doesn't happen a lot. Usually they just ignore these situations.
So the moral of the story: if you see a Bigfoot, don't spray it down with a garden hose.
Yeah, don't make it mad. They are very temperamental. There was another guy, and I don't know if he's still around or not, was in Georgia, but he was living in South Carolina, I believe, at the time. And he was a researcher in that area. And there was a small community where, and he said he never could figure out why the creature was doing this, but it was killing livestock just for the sake of killing them. It would carry away pigs sometimes, I'm sure, to eat, but they found a horse that had been it was bitten through its spinal column on its neck, and that's how it was killed. But it would kill animals near people's homes just so they knew. Apparently, it was there killing them.
Now, a bite to the spinal cord, that's debilitating. That is something that has done that quite a few times and has mastered that.
Apparently, so yeah.
So what you have, that was one of my questions. You have those that will kill livestock and family pets, and you
Just
have those
vindictive, yeah.
that will still terrorize you but yet never do that. What I don't understand the concept
The
on that.
psychology, I think their psychology is as interesting as human psychology because, well, having worked in police work, that there's all kinds of people and all kinds of motivations, and it's sort of a grab bag. You never quite know what you're going to get into. Um, I look at these things sometimes like we watch all these ID shows, with the serial killers and stuff, and how they develop is kind of interesting to me. From you see these children are almost born like that, and then they grow up into these people, and they as they grow and learn these techniques, it's like they test the waters, what they can and can't do, what they can get away with, and the Sasquatch behavior is kind of like that. When the aggressive ones, it's like, depending on what part of life they're in, it's almost like they're testing the water sometimes and seeing what they can get away with, and then they'll progress from there sometimes.
I will tap into my experience as law enforcement. Some of the most dangerous people and the people that really put me on guard and just put me in the ready position, that you know just some of the most dangerous people I have ever dealt with are the ones that are silent and just stand there. You,
Yeah, I can see that because you don't know what's going on in their mind. I mean, they're not going to turn their cards.
so what stays silent is always what is sizing you up and studying you, and after a while they learn your weakness. And it's just like, having someone on scene that's watching you, and they're silent, and they're studying you. They're looking for your weakness.
Hmm.
And that, I think, to me would apply to going out on a property and someone telling me, well, I know it's here and I never have a problem with it. Well, that's
Yeah,
great, but when does that end?
exactly. Well, it's funny. We recorded one of the shows that I do weekly just a little while ago, our Q&A, and one of the questions came up. It's very similar to that. It's like, well, if a Sasquatch is just watching people, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And I said, well, I could tell you, and our anthropologist, she answered the question first about with chimps and some other higher primates that do that, and usually they're sizing up the situation before they get aggressive, and there's lots of cases that she cited, in those instances where they watch people very carefully, and then I can't remember what there was. There was one, and I believe it was in Africa, where these chimps were killing women and children. But that's what they would do. They'd watch very carefully and size them up. And I've had reports of Sasquatches. There was one in particular from southern Washington a couple of years ago where this guy with his utility truck pulled off by this lake, and he was just sitting there. And I don't know if he was, taking a break or what he was doing, but he happened to glance over by the tree line, and he sees this creature standing at the tree line. And this creature apparently didn't look at him. It was fixated on this young family by the lake, not more than 100 feet away. And he watched it staring at them for about a half an hour before it finally took note of him and then turned around and left. But that's kind of creepy to me. I mean, that's in lots of situations where these things are, in looking at windows at night at children sleeping. And there's only one reason a predator is going to do that, and of course, they go after young and old and sick. All predators do, because that's the easy meal. If you go after a strong member of a species, not that they wouldn't, but usually they don't, because any kind of a fight could bring on an injury, and an injury in nature is death, through infection and all that. But so that's why they attack the easier meals. Yeah, blunt way to put it, but that's the gist of it.
So, if you have one on your property or you're going out into an area, and you feel like you are accepted there to do your research, that could be a false sense of security. It could be
Absolutely.
a waiting game to, I mean, even the best hunter will study the prey
Oh
before.
yeah. Yeah, you got to be very careful. I mean, there's a lot of people that like to do what they call habituation, and I always think, no, don't do that. You don't know what's in that creature's mind.
So when you get down to these creatures, there are several types of them.
Hmm.
And I know how you feel about dog man, but what I saw, it looked like a dog.
Right. And
it
there's actually three variants that look like that.
Well, let's go into that
Okay.
because what I find from the Bigfoot community is that I get shut down when I try to speak of my experience. And when what I saw was not like these thumbnails out there, like these
Hmm.
really overbearing, just scared, crazy large. And I'm not saying people don't see that. Mine was a very toned down, it almost had an Akita face or like
Hmm.
snout on it. And the arms looked like a bodybuilder, but it was on all fours. But I
Right.
worked around animals. I worked 17 years in law enforcement. I grew up in
Hmm.
the swamp. That was not normal. So let's go into the different types and what people are seeing out there, because I feel like I my experience has been dismissed because mine doesn't fit the generic of what the community thinks I should have saw.
Yeah, there's these people in the Bigfoot, and I don't consider myself part of the Bigfoot community. Um, and same thing. I'll say, on my show that, the dogman stuff is there. It's misidentification, and I'll get all kinds of angry, messages on YouTube, but I don't really care, because, I know what I was told by people inside the government that deal with this stuff. In fact,
Would be
um,
Mr. Black.
Mr. Black, yeah, and I've known him for more than 10 years. Great guy. Um, he told me there were four major groupings, with 22 variations.
Oh my goodness, I never heard
So,
that.
oh yeah, well, you're hearing it. It's hearing because I'm the first one that's telling it. He's going to be telling it more too when we're going to start recording his stuff since his NDA's expired finally. But so what he's told me when we've talked, and it's funny, we have a lot of conversations, we text a lot, and something will come up and I'll run it by him. It's maybe something I'm not familiar with, and this thing. The type threes are the ones that have that elongated face and look, are what people refer.
Barbaric.
Yeah, it's what they call dogman. They have a face like a baboon, more like a baboon, that snout, And in fact, we interviewed a guy from Oklahoma, and he swears up and down he saw a dogman, which is translates into werewolf. That's what people are saying. It's a it's a current term, but that's what they mean as werewolf. And I just kind of chuckle because werewolves aren't real, but these type three creatures definitely are. And then he told me, oh, going back to this guy from Oklahoma, and he had an artist draw what he saw. Well, when you look at what he saw, it was a type three creature. The only difference was, other than, like with the Patterson picture, it had the extended face, and
Their
so
temperament are bad, worse, aren't
they're nasty. Yes, very nasty. He told me you definitely don't want to run into one of those. But when I was telling him about that incident, he says, "Well, and there are three variations of those." I'm like, "Oh, geez, that's what I need more stuff, to have to factor into the equation." But and I'm waiting for more information on those. But you get a lot of variation among any species. I mean, you could put 10 people in a room, and no two are exactly alike. So
they?
same with these creatures, you're going to see something that's as a general description, and being on all fours, that's certainly acceptable. Oh, I got to send you some pictures too, uh, since we're on that.
You sent me the puppy pictures.
I,
That was awesome.
I need to send you some knuckle prints though.
Yes, but I don't know if you remember, but it was around 2018 or 19. I sent you a picture of a footprint, and you said, "Hold up, let me make contact with my Mr. Black." And like
Oh.
3 days later, you
Hmm.
come back and you said that is a top three print.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I figured he would know.
Yes, you confirmed that because what we were seeing and what I experienced, I never told you because I mean you were like, "No, I don't do the dog man," but I never told you what I saw had a
Right.
smell. I never told you that. I just sent you to print, and so
Hmm.
to me that just was, you were solid with me on that one. Not that you
That's good.
needed to be. So you come back 3 days later, and I'm like, well, he must have forgot, but no, you're like, according to Mr. Black, this is a top three,
Yeah,
and
usually I got to wait for him to respond because he's busy too.
yeah, well, I thought that was incredible, and I know you deal with a lot of people, but I always remembered that. So, but
Well,
and
that's good. Yeah,
as
if
I
it's usually something, if I'm not familiar with it, I'll run it by him or somebody that you know I trust, and they'll come back with either yay or nay or what it is.
so as you're taking this journey, how did you come across Mr. Black?
He actually contacted me when I co-hosted a podcast that we won't mention. Um,
Yeah.
I I can't remember if he came on there. Been so long ago, I don't remember, and so much stuff comes through here. Um, so he reached out, and because we have similar backgrounds, that's why and of course the way I present information and the other guy does, he didn't like him, but he liked me, and we got talking, and he says, well, I've never talked to anybody before. I don't never felt comfortable because of my job, and he says they could still come after me because I'm still under NDAs and everything, and he had too much to lose to be talking about things. So the more we talked, the more we got to be friends. So that's
That's
happened a lot. People will reach out to me because they've heard me talk someplace.
Have you ever heard of them train hopping?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I got someone from North Carolina, we were talking, and they couldn't tell what it was, but it was huge, big, black, and it had jumped off the back of a train. Or I think, as he said, it was like there was a carriage place where you could, um, I guess, crawl into, and it just come off like a
Yep. Mr. Black said that's actually a common occurrence. They do that often.
wow. So wow. So I'm like, someone gets missing off a train. They're looking at their buddies that work on the
Hmm.
train. Oh, yeah, that's terrible. Where do we go wrong in the Bigfoot Sasquatch world when we were? I don't consider myself a researcher, and I'll tell you this, and I'm very blunt about it. If someone has a sighting and they want me to go on their property, I have no problem with that. But I'm not there as a researcher.
Hmm.
I'm there for the adrenaline. I'm there for the curiosity. I'm there for the mystery because
Oh,
I
sure.
my mind needs that, because I don't do law enforcement anymore. And anyone knows when you have worked military law enforcement,
Oh, yeah.
firefight. When your brain stop or when your career stops, your brain don't. That's when it's like slamming on brakes and
Right.
everything follow. So you have to keep your mind busy. But that is why I go out. Where do we make our mistakes when we go out? We know we're in a hot spot. We know these people are credible. They're not, giving you the signals that they're embellishing a story. Where are we going wrong that we don't get the experience, the encounter, or the activity that they are getting? Is it because we're coming in out the area and they don't know us, or is it how we're conducting ourselves, or
Well, it's a lot of those things. I mean, and from law enforcement, it's when you're doing an investigation, and this is should be very similar to that. You can't just come blundering in. You have to kind of. I always try to kind of ease into a situation. You know, um, talk to the people, have them show me where things were going on. Don't bring a huge number of people in. Not a lot of lights. You want to keep things kind of low key. If the creatures are there, they'll watch. Like with Yakult, what we did there was um, I told my people we were only going to go into certain places. The creatures typically weren't there in the daytime, so we could go out in the fields in the daytime and look and see what they did. But an hour before dusk, it's a no-no to be out there. We wouldn't go beyond the mowed yard. And in fact, one night we were there, we'd split into two groups in the yard. I was with their son Nick, and we had a German Shepherd, and somebody else was with me. And then like, two of my people were with the lady of the house, and they were walking around another part of the yard. So the dog alerted on something. And like I said, we weren't shining flashlights or anything. We were just walking and close and talking quietly. And the dog walked, their German Shepherd went up to the fence. And on the other side of the fence was tall field grass. And apparently one of the creatures was right there because it took off running parallel to us, jumped over the fence onto the blacktop, and you could hear bare feet slapping, slap, 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 slap down the road going away from us. It was the craziest thing I ever heard, but it was clearly bipedal, bare feet on pavement. And but since we weren't shining lights, we weren't doing all the normal things that people would do. It apparently stayed right there until we got really close to it. So um, those are the kind of things you learn. It's like, you establish a boundary where they are and you're not going to be, and vice versa. And in fact, that situation would have continued. I think eventually we would have actually seen the creatures in the daytime. But a PhD who ran the Oregon Primate Research Center called me, and he wanted to come there, and he got in an argument with me over the phone, stating basically, well, I've got a PhD and I know more than you. And he said, I've got 20 years in the field experience, so I know more than you do, and I'm in charge here. The family said anybody coming to the property had to come through me. and for obvious reasons. I mean, I don't want people to just go anybody going on somebody's private property and disturbing them. That's just rude. Um, so we agreed to go there to meet there at a certain day and time, and he violated that. He decided he was going to go there when he wanted to go there. He went out into their area and put a bunch of stuff out there. It made the creatures angry. They went to the neighboring farm, tore up their garden, scared the people so bad they abandoned their property. Um, and this clown to this day, I think he thinks he's the expert on Yakult, even though he was there about 30 minutes.
Well, I'm gonna tell you what. If I had to give my farm up because some ignorant person
Oh,
come showed their, yeah, let's
I was
not even
beside
go.
myself.
So that brings the next question. When you have a property and you're having activity, bringing in these certain researchers can really backfire on you
Oh,
because
yeah,
you have it can make your situation a lot worse than what it was.
absolutely. And there's lots of people out there that claim they know what they're doing, and they go places and they really have no clue what they're doing.
Have you had situations where people have invited researchers on their property and it went to a level that people could not stay on their property, and it was just the way the people treated the land and the way
Oh, yeah.
they went
Yeah.
about it? How do you
Yep.
fix that?
Absolutely. Sometimes you can't. Um, there was, in fact, Fred and I both, we dealt with one guy in Alaska, and the property owner had all this stuff going on. There was a Bigfoot group that went up there, and of course they did everything wrong, and they left, um, and Fred went there. I mean, Tom and I tried advising this guy, and he simply wouldn't listen. We'd tell him what to do and what not to do, and it was always like, well, why shouldn't I do that? We'd explain it to him. He just wouldn't accept the answer. So I told him, I said, well, I can't help you. If you're not willing to accept what I'm explaining to you, then we're not compatible in what we're doing. So, best of luck with your situation there. And then this other group came there and kind of they got a bunch of recordings, and then they did nothing. Then Fred went there and he had the same issues that we were having. So Fred and I had a laugh about that. That he said, same thing I did. Look, there's just nothing we can do with some of these people, and the guy was totally ignoring, where the creatures were and what they were doing and why they were doing it. And unfortunately, fortunately, most people do listen, and you can work with them, but some people just don't.
Well, Fred's a good public service to his community,
He really is.
and I'll tell you something else that I really like about Fred, other than stealing his phrase, squash bait. I love that. He he's very humble, very great guy.
Hmm.
He does a service to his community, but he has captured the art of telling a story, which is a art that has been long forgotten
Oh,
in
yeah,
tradition.
yeah.
And I think that's great. Every chance I get, I support his channel, and I just think he is a awesome gentleman, and I really think he does a good service to his people.
Fred and I see eye to eye on just about everything, and our approach is, helping people. That's kind of, you asked what I wanted to get out of doing this. It used to be, proving the things are out there, and I'm, still interested in doing that, but that's not a main focus. The main focus is people go through some really traumatic stuff with their experiences with these things, and keeping people safe. The ones who don't or haven't had experiences, if we can show the true nature of what these things are like, and it saves people's lives, or keeps them safe. That's my main goal.
The community, there can be some very good, solid people in the community, but the community can also be very cruel, very
Hmm.
bullyish, and when they get I guess a thorn in their side with you, they will stop. They are relentless to
Oh,
try to
they are.
destroy you,
Yep.
and that is one thing that even now I get a little bit that kind of tinkers over, even though I do a podcast, and the best advice I get unfortunately I don't agree with it is I can't be a researcher and a podcaster. I I don't consider myself a researcher. I do like to have my curiosity satisfied, and I'm not going to lie. I will go out for the thrill
Mm-hmm.
on high alert if I can collect something that's tangible and is credible. That's totally fine with me. But I don't go in there looking to get a name or that one piece of evidence that puts my name out there.
And you don't
Um,
have to. If those
so yeah,
people, the heck with them. That's what I say. The heck with them.
but my thing is what I go out in the field and I do has nothing to do with my podcast because I tell a variety of stories on my podcast.
Sure.
And it's there are stories that I have on my podcast that are entertainment and they want their story told and they're great stories and
Mm-hmm.
people resonate to them and their stories on there that are more kind of leaning toward the way I think, but they're my thing is I'm going to continue to do both. What I have on on my podcast is not necessary. I can have a variety, but it doesn't mean I'm stuck in a clump. I'm still
Absolutely.
me. I'm still Victoria, and I still have that law enforcement kind of mentality, and that really rubs a lot of people wrong. But that's just me.
You know what?
So
That's too bad for them. That's what I say.
my question is, what is your end game on this?
Well, like I was mentioning, keeping educating people and keeping them safe. That's kind of my goal at this point in life, is to do that. And if I can accomplish that, then I'll feel successful.
You handpick your team,
I do.
and you do have a Facebook group, and you have your. There's a lot of people in it, and the information is really great. But that even reflects your work and the people under you that you have someone in every state.
Mm-hmm. And in
Um,
different countries.
yeah, and so we probably should put your Facebook. And just in case someone doesn't know, if you want to tell them where they can find your Facebook,
Yeah, it's the Jevning
it's
Research Bigfoot.
titled yes.
Yeah, it's the
So
JRG group.
yes, yes, and it's a very informative group. A lot of critical thinking there. What
We've
is
actually
your
we're actually rubbing off on other groups too because you see stuff on Facebook. Somebody will throw something up there. I remember seeing bear tracks up there. And I found a lot of bear tracks in my years, and people were saying, "Oh, that's a great Bigfoot track." And then there were people, I think they were from our group, saying, "No, those are not. Those are bear tracks." And they were explaining why, and getting people to be critical thinkers. That's one of my goals too. I want people to think, be skeptical. Don't just accept any garbage out there. Ask questions. Make them prove what it is.
so the people that think it's a bear track, there's a way there's a difference between coming at someone and attacking them for being wrong and
Hmm.
educating someone as you're telling them they're wrong.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that makes the big hoaxsters. Let's talk about hoaxsters.
Okay.
What is how are they damaging the field and the community? Because those seem to be the ones that get the most support, that generate the most funds to get the best equipment. And what is your take on that? Because you have people out there that just are they're rubbing pennies together trying to get good equipment, and then you have someone over here they'll post anything they want.
Oh yeah.
And what is your take on that?
Well, first of all, I think public beatings ought to come back into fashion for those people.
Yeah.
No, well, here's the situation. These people are out to make a buck and get attention, and people will call themselves cryptozoologists and all this nonsense. And I can't tolerate even listening to these people. It makes my brain hurt. Um, they damage the topic because there are those of us that have actually been up close to these things and had the living bejesus scared out of us, and it's a lifelong fear. It's not something that it happened. My first encounter 50 years ago. It never goes away. I still have nightmares occasionally about that, and so does everyone that's had that experience. So when these people go on hoax, it's like degrading combat veterans. People who had never been in the military, and like the whole stolen valor thing, for instance. The reason that
Yeah.
became a law because there are those of us that have earned our medals and badges and things, and especially the guys and not guys and gals too that went to combat. They earned the hard way what they got, and then these people go out and cheapen it by doing this kind of stuff. It's the same thing with this topic. Um, everybody I talk to that's had an encounter, it makes them angry.
Well, I agree with you, especially with the stolen valor part, because you could go out for years and years and years
Oh
and
yeah,
not. But there was a time when my friend and I went out, and it seemed like the less experience we had, the more activities we had. And at the
right.
time, um, at the time, Jeremiah, he was from New York and he moved to North Carolina, and he had
Jeremiah
kind of,
Fountain. Yeah.
yeah, he kind of took me under his wing, and I kept showing him
Hmm.
photos. But it seems to me the more inexperienced and the more, I don't know if there's just a sense about us that they just pick up on and get comfortable with
It
because we
could
don't have
be.
a
Yeah.
clue of what we're doing. But it seems like when you get a little seasoned in the field, as we would say in law enforcement, where you become
Hmm.
like an OG, and I'm 52, so I guess I'd be an OG. It's To me, it happens less and less.
It can. I mean, I think maybe because we're more critical. The more experience you have, you're
Mhm.
more critical. So things that you might have picked up when you had less experience,
That is.
we tend to overlook more, I think.
So let's go to states. I'm from the state of North Carolina.
Hmm.
I tell people all the time, the
Where my
one,
cousin David lives.
well, hello, David. Um, so I'm right here around the Fort Bragg area,
Hmm.
and I get a lot of reports where they're telling me they don't see the patty type. The ones they are seeing are tall, slender,
Hmm.
athletic,
Right.
useful, not overbearing muscles. I
Hmm.
get told a lot those are juveniles and they just haven't grew up to be in the patty
No,
type.
no.
But I keep
There
thinking
is a
there's no.
variation. Yeah, there is
Let's
a
see.
variation like that.
What do you find more often in North Carolina?
Like what you just described. I'll tell you, we had an interesting pair of witnesses in Alabama, and on their property, they'd been seeing these creatures, and at one time, they were watching this one individual. And in the South, there's what I call a type two. It's very similar to the
Hmm.
Patterson Sasquatch, but they have pronounced canine teeth, and they'll more often be on all fours, and you'll see them in groups instead of individually. Um,
So
but they
that's
watched
probably
this.
what I saw.
Yeah, they watched this individual sitting down in this field, and they were watching it just sitting there, whatever it was doing, and then it kind of. I think they said it acted like it sniffed in the air. And then here come these two or three other individuals that were very different looking, like it's very similar to what you described. And then apparently they caught wind of the first individual, and they made a hasty retreat and left the area. And they said the first one that was sitting down had a real disgusted look on its face. So I
Wow.
thought
So
that was real
territorial.
something like that. Yeah. Or the two different species. I found that very interesting.
That just tells me that they are territorial too.
Very territorial. In fact, you've probably seen, people are showing what I first discovered was the tree breaks. Um, and I was at Bob Titmus's house one time, and he was showing me all these things, and I wasn't real impressed with them. They were just little sticks that were about an inch thick, and they were snapped in half, and he had piles of them all over the place. And he said, well, we were following these tracks one time, and he says, I guess it just walked along and was just snapping these sticks over. And I didn't think a whole lot of it until now there was a story in one of Green's books that comes from Sports Afield magazine around 1960 or 63. And it was about a couple of guys up in Alaska, and the group of Indians. They said that Gilliuk is what they called it, was there hunting, and not hunting caribou, it hunted men. And they wanted the
Mm.
two white guys to be in the camp with them because they said that Gilliuk didn't molest the white men, but it ate Indians. So they wanted them there, hoping for some protection. And they took the two guys to this plateau where it had marked territory, and they described it as a twisted matchstick. And I had to think, this probably happened in the 1940s. What were matchsticks like in 1940? Well, they were the heavy wooden matchsticks. So how would you twist that? And I remember my parents, they were from that generation, and their friends, and how they talked about things. The way they would describe things, the wording they would use wouldn't be the same as the way we talk about things. So twisting, and I remember my grandparents saying things like that. When you twist something, it would be snapping it over. And so I that was in the back of my mind. So a buddy of mine and I wanted to go into this watershed in southern Washington where there was a film made. I can't remember. It was 1972. And I was watching TV one day, and I said, "Oh, hey, I know that road. We go up there all the time." So these guys had tried to get into this watershed, and I think they scared themselves with what they did, but they had a hell of a time getting out and everything. So we tried 5 different times to get into that watershed. It's a really rugged country, and I mean, going up the creek didn't work because there are 300-foot sheer rock walls, and being a scout, I was stubborn. I was going to find my way in there, so we eventually did. Didn't find anything in the watershed, so we had suspected that the headwaters of that area, there was a saddle that was in between two headwaters of these two bodies of water drainage systems, and we knew there were tracks and sightings that happened on the saddle, so we wanted to climb up through the backside to the saddle. So we got about 2,200 feet in elevation and decided to take a break going cross country. And I happened to look not far from where we were standing. Here was this Doug fir, and it was and I measured it, was 8 feet 1 inches off the ground. It was 3 inches thick, and it was snapped 90 degrees over. And
Wow.
I thought, how in the world did that happen? This is the middle of July. There's no bad weather. It's in a closed canopy, so there was no wind. No other tree was damaged. And then I happened to notice about 100 yards to the northeast, there was another one. So we went to that one, and we see another one. And I ended up counting about 13 of these. And I took pictures, and I talked to a friend of mine that was a Klamath Indian, and he chuckled when I showed him the pictures. And he says, "Oh, you finally found that." Come on, dude. What is this? And he says, "All right, I'll tell you." He says, that's how they mark their territory. And he says, what you found was the big one, meaning the alpha. That was his mark showing the others in the group. That's the direction we're going to the next feeding area. I
Oh,
thought, wow. And then he says, there is one other time you might see this sign. He says, but they'll mark an area where there's a lot of human activity. And I actually found that in Northern California one time. So um, something we learned with the broken trees like that is you usually find that where there's recent activity. When we were doing our film, well, we were being filmed. I didn't realize Adam was creating the film from that trip, but we were looking over this one area with there was recent activity, and where they had peeled bark and some other things. And we were going to go 30 miles cross country in the Three Sisters Wilderness to another location that we wanted to look at. And I told everybody on the team, I said, well, along the way, count how many of these things you see if it's natural. Let me know what your thoughts are along after we get there. So we got there. No one saw a single tree like that the entire way, 30 miles.
wow.
We did find one when we got to near a Boy Scout camp. And I said, there you
You
go.
said that was to a feeding site?
It was, well, that was, well, we don't know what they were doing in that area. Well, at the first place, they were, and I'd only seen this in Northern California, where they would peel the outer bark off these fir trees, and then they would take their nails and they would scrape that Cambrian layer underneath.
Uh-huh.
Hundreds of times they were, and then again, my Indian friends say that's, they would use that kind of thing for stomach problems. They would make a tea out of that
The
kind of stuff.
herbs, the
And I thought,
herbs.
oh, that makes a whole bunch of sense.
I have always said the kudzu vine is the best thing that they could ever ingest.
Yeah, yeah.
The roots, the leaves, it's an area for small game. It
Hmm.
camouflages them and it has municipal
Yeah,
principles to it.
lots of uses, sure. What I always look for when I go into an area is something that doesn't belong there. What's doesn't belong to this area? Things like the snap tree. That's, there's lots. You have to understand weather breaks. Of course, I grew up in Western Washington, so we got all kinds of bad weather there. And you grow up recognizing all the things that wind and weather do to trees. But these kind of stand out. Once you know what these look like, you can't miss them.
I
But
actually go
oh,
ahead.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I actually was on someone's property last week in Western North Carolina, um, where he had just moved on the property and something screamed on him or
Hmm.
behind his shed. And he said it scared him so bad he never got back to the house fast enough. But he later on went out behind the shed and it was maybe a 3 to 5 inch tree that would it was just twisted and broke down.
Yeah.
And so when we got out there, time had passed and the tree had died. That's how much it was twisted,
Hmm.
where it killed the tree. But it was still there, and we got a picture of it, and we are like,
Oh,
"Wow,
excellent.
that is
Yeah,
strength."
I don't know what the difference is. Maybe it's the tree type because sometimes you find them snapped over 90 degrees. Sometimes they're twisted. We were up in Northern California one year, and there was a stand of these little trees. They were probably, I don't know, 12, 15 feet tall, these little ponderosa pines, and they were thick. There was probably 20 trees in this little cluster, and right in the very center. And it was funny because it was like the other time, it was the middle of July, hot weather, and this one tree, they were about 3 inches thick, the trunk, and it looked just like you would take a wet wash rag, and wring the water out.
Hmm.
That's what the trunk looked like. And you could see through 1/4 inch gaps in the trunk.
I will send you this picture.
Okay.
Um, so out of all, so I know we get tree breaks, but you get a lot of small trees that are natural because of
Hmm.
disease and
Oh, yeah.
everything. But
Yeah.
I'll tell you what I have come across in a active area where saplings are woven together in a path that you had
Oh,
just went.
interesting.
Have you ever heard that, or is that common? Because they
I,
weren't there, the day before when we were out. But
I've heard of some odd things like that in that part of the country. And it really is kind of regional sometimes, the things you find.
mhm.
Um, because
Now, if
in the,
you don't think there's nothing to it, sir, I can handle the truth. Throw it at the sister. But I found it intriguing that this keeps coming up in areas where something's out there.
Mhm. Well, it could very well be. I mean, they're highly intelligent, so and there's different variants there than there are out here. So they're going to do different things. I had some pictures from, oh, was it Georgia? I'm trying to remember what state it was in, but they had woven some, um, and I don't know what kind of a reed it was around these two trees, and I trust the guy that sent the picture, so he found it. But in some places, I mean, it just depends on the variant, I guess. I'm not a great have a great familiarity with some parts of the country and what the creatures are doing, but because I'm not there,
Oh,
but I have seen these things.
I will make sure you get those photos, sir. Um, when it comes, okay, so you have the tree breaks, the
Hmm.
structures, the trying to think what else comes up a
Sometimes,
lot.
oh, now there are a couple of things that I found. Well, actually, Renee DeHinden put me onto one thing, this was rock stacking. Now you have to be real particular with these kinds of things.
Okay.
Um, there was a story back in 1967 in Oregon of a logger who watched these two adults, and there was a juvenile. They watched the creatures turning rocks over and smelling them, and then at one point, what he thought was the male started throwing rocks out and dug this big hole and pulled these nest of rodents out, and they ate the rodents, and then they saw him and left. Um, Renee called me one time from California, and I knew the story from John Green's book, and Green didn't put much in there, but it was a picture of his son in the hole, and all you could see was it was just his son from the shoulders up. You couldn't see the hole, and then there was these couple of rock stacks. So I asked Renee. We met for breakfast in Estacada, Oregon. After he was getting ready to leave, I said, Renee, where is this site? What do you think of it? He says, well, I'll take you up and show you. So we drove up, and he says, we go up there, up this trail, and you'll find it. And he says, I got to go, but you let me know what you see. So me and another friend went up there, and it was dark, so we had to go another day. But we went there, and sure enough, there were probably a dozen of these, and they're big rocks. It's an old volcanic. I don't know exactly what kind of a site that is, where these big angular rocks are laying all over the place. There's hundreds of them, and these things were stacked between 3 and 4 rocks on each one, and they're big rocks. Some of these rocks weigh a couple 100 pounds easily.
Wow.
And the hole was, I measured it. It was 6 feet across and 6 feet deep. And I thought, holy cow, that's a heck of a hole. In fact, I put it in at least one of my books, maybe 2 of them, picture of me in the hole, showing how large this thing is. And I used to think, geez, that's kind of a big hole for just grabbing some rodents out of there. Why would something this big go through that much effort for that small a payload or payoff when you could grab a deer? So I called Renee and I said, well, told him what I thought, my initial, thoughts about the site and everything. He says, well, when are you coming up next? I said, I can come up a couple of days if you want. So we arranged for me to drive up there and spend a few days with him. And he told me how to find, he said, I'm the only one that's taken any interest in this. I found other sites like that one. He says, that one people have been to, there's a trail right to it. In fact, I think even Finding Bigfoot went there one time. And that was because it was put out through somebody I had taken to the site. But he told me how to find these other places. And they're all cross country. There's no trails, no roads, nothing near these places. He told me exactly how to find them. And I found, I think, 7 others. And I photographed and documented all those. And then there was others in Washington as well. And then Fred told me that the Indians up there told him where there's some in Alaska. And I interviewed another guy up in, I'm trying to think what province that is in northern Canada, northwestern Canada. Must be, I think it was the Yukon area. They were doing oil exploration. They had to fly these guys in by helicopter 37 kilometers, no roads or anything up there. So this guy Dan encountered the Sasquatch up there, whistled at him, and he got pretty scared. Had beautiful tracks he sent me, and said that he had seen these same rock stacks up there. And there were stacks and piles. There were, and I don't know even to this day the significance of what those are, but they do them. And I took this stuff back to Renee after I photographed all of these different sites, and we discussed it. And he says, well, keep your eye on this, and he says maybe it'll lead somewhere. Well, it hasn't yet. I mean, but it is another particular part of this. It's a behavior they do, and it's what they're doing. We don't know. The hole is so big. I often wondered if they weren't going to bury a dead one in this hole.
When it comes to their demise, what do you think takes them out? Is it age? Is it, to me, I've always said maybe something as simple as a dental infection could take them out.
Sure. Like any wildlife, it's always instructive to look at chimps and gorillas and other higher primates, for those kinds of questions. How long do chimps live, and in what sort of ways do they pass away, and what happens to them afterwards. I think it's very similar to these things.
Do you think they cannibalize each other?
Sometimes. It was funny. One of the sites we were taken to, there was an old timer in the town of Carson, and usually he didn't have any good information. I watched him and another friend of mine argue over a mud puddle one afternoon. Well,
I
there
can
was
see it. I
there was
can.
this the guy's name was Datus Perry, and Datus was a nice old man, but he oh geez, there's all kinds of stories. Tom and all of us used to laugh about me telling the stories about you know Datus was he was a character. I don't know how other to describe him. He had this white beard, and he'd always kind of flip it up, and he'd kind of talk like that through it, and but I figured I needed. Karsten was a long ways away from Vancouver, and I needed somebody out there. If they heard or saw something, they would call me. So that's we established him as that contact, and uh, my friend Carlo took me out there, and he had this Bigfoot cutout he made out of plywood and bear hair that was 9 feet tall. And he says, "Well, Datus is excited. He's got a real Sasquatch hunter coming out to see him." So apparently, my name meant something to him. So whenever he'd get something, Carlo would call me. He'd come from Portland, pick me up, and we'd drive 75 miles out there. And it was usually nothing. It was somebody that said something, but there was never any details. So it was usually a wasted trip. But
He
there
wanted
were a
company.
couple, there were a couple times that were good. Like um, this particular time, he took us to this site, and we had to walk. We parked along the road, and we walked through the timber, a couple hundred yards, and lo and behold, it opened the timber opened up to this open area, and here were these mounds of rocks. And I thought, wow, these things I think I measured them 10 feet across. They were 5 or 6 feet high. The rocks were roughly, softball to basketball size. And some of them had been there quite a while because there was moss growing on them. So I took a lot of pictures, and then my training was archaeology originally. So I'm on one side trying to excavate one of these piles. I wanted to see what was under it. And my friend Carlo was a sociologist, so he was on the other side, and I was not focused on anything he was saying. And I kept wondering after a while, how come this hole isn't getting deeper? And then I look over to him, and he's saying, well, if these are Native American, we should respect them. And he's putting the rocks back in the hole, and I wasn't seeing it. So I said, okay, we won't excavate these. And we never did. I probably should have gone back, but that's how focused I can be sometimes. Where like nothing is going on around me except where I'm looking. And here's the nicest guy in the world. He's putting the rocks back in, saying, I think we need to respect this. And doggone it, Carl, quit doing that.
That's called tunnel vision, Will. That's called tunnel vision.
But I
So,
talked to some of my Native friends in the area, and they said those don't belong to our people. Didn't do that. That's
wow.
these creatures that did that.
Wow. Now, so before we get into the History Channel coming,
Okay.
what is the most, well, this is a two-part question. What is the most bizarre behavior or case that you have documented, and what do we overlook the most when we are in a area? What is the most subtle or the something you never hear a researcher talking about, but it's right there in front of their face that you could contribute to a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot?
Well, I think as far as the markings go, again, the broken tree is the most obvious one because if it's there, you can pretty well be sure that one has either been there recently or is still in the area. And most people, that's one of those things. I always figured these things are doing stuff that have been right out in the open that people just sort of ignored because they figured that was part of the background. And when you look at trees and brush, stuff happens to it just through nature, weather, and all that kind of stuff. And you look at something and you don't think twice about it because that weather did that. Well, not all of it. The most bizarre thing, geez, I've heard so many. The one that really sticks out was one not long ago. This lady we talked to in Missouri, Carol, where her neighbor came over and talked to her, and I think I'd mentioned this about how the lady was knocked down and knocked out. And after the second time she woke up, the thing had opened her midsection and was eating her small intestines in front of her.
Oh
Um,
no, what?
oh, I
That
didn't I tell
Will,
you that?
no,
Oh,
Will,
oh.
come on now.
So I never know what I'm going to hear in interviews when people, they consent to come on the show and we record. Nice
My
lady, this nice lady Carol in Missouri lives in a very small community. Lots of activity around there, and she wasn't told. The people out there all knew these things were around there and they were dangerous. So her neighbor lady come over and she said she was telling her that she was on the trail, I guess, between their homes one time a few years before, and she got knocked out. When she woke up, this thing was standing over her, and apparently she passed out again. And the next time she woke up, this thing had opened her midsection and was just beginning to eat her small intestines in front of her. Unfortunately, another neighbor with some dogs was coming along at that time and scared the creature away. And she showed Carol the scar when they took her to the hospital and they patched her up so that she would believe that this actually happened. Um, to me,
oh,
that's one of the most horrendous things. I mean, I thought I'd heard everything, and I'm sitting there with my mouth open as she's telling this stuff.
oh, but that goes one more question before
Okay.
we. I'm still in awe, but I'm going to pick your brain till you make me
I
stop.
still am after all this time. Carol and I stay in touch too because I'm concerned about her.
Oh, okay, okay. Let me just shake that off. Okay. Um,
Yeah,
I mean,
good
I
luck shaking
believe
that one
you.
off.
I believe you. I mean, I believe that
Oh,
because I
yeah,
do not think they're these lovable, just they want to be your buddy. They're out there, they're surviving, and I do believe we are their biggest threat other than disease. And
absolutely. Hmm.
the when you're looking at their kills, I've heard that they have will break a deer's legs and
Oh,
leave them there. But my thing is, why would they leave a wild animal there
oh.
to attract other predators? To me, it would be a neck break, or as you said, a bite to the spine.
Well, here's a situation. We interviewed a guy in Texas,
Hmm.
and it's I don't know last year, year before last, and he saw these things did this right in front of him. He was hunting deer, and he see these deer come running up by him, and the creatures were hot on their heels. And he said one of them, and he said it was close, less than 20 feet from him. It grabbed the deer, it snapped its front legs and left it there. And then they went running after the other deer. They were trying to catch more deer. They would just hobble them. And he said the poor thing, the sounds were awful it was making. And then it came back and twisted its head, killing it. And they grabbed the deer that they'd killed and walked off.
So that would be the reason they were. There was
In
more
that
than
case,
one.
yes.
They're still in close proximity.
Yeah.
If you,
Yeah.
wow.
There
So
was there was other cases too. Like you mentioned Jeremiah. He sent me pictures from a lady who lived in I think this her place in New York. She lives in Northern California now, but she was in New York then, and it's happened 2 years in a row where there's a deer hanging 11 feet up a tree, and since then I found or not found but have collected other pictures, from other witnesses in different areas of the same thing. And the only thing I can conclude from that is, if you can kill a deer, sure, but these guys will conserve energy as much as they can. So I think that what they're doing is they're baiting. If they, kill a deer or something, hang in a tree, and other animals, other predators are going to come up to that. Well, you maximize your food and minimize the amount of effort to do it.
wow. So I'm thinking about this horse that was bit in the
Hmm.
spine. This was a full grown horse, right?
Hmm.
Say what, a couple hundred
Yeah.
pounds or
Oh, horse, you figure probably 12, 1,300 pounds.
okay. So like a quarter horse, standard
Right.
quarter.
Right.
Imagine it biting the spine of this horse and crushing it. I'm assuming that was the kill bite.
Yeah.
Imagine how big that has to be. Imagine the strength,
Oh, these
the
things are
width.
incredible.
I, I would shoot it with a slug. I'm sorry.
Oh, at
If
least,
I had to take a shot, it
at
would have to
least.
be a slug.
Yeah.
That has to be a huge creature. I mean,
Oh
that.
yeah, probably 10 feet, close to 2,000 pounds.
But was the horse consumed, or was that a pleasure
Oh no,
kill?
it just killed it and left it. That's what he told me. That's what happened with dozens of animals around that community. That it's just killing them and leaving them, like it was sending a message or something.
So when you get that in the community, I'm from the South. Let's just say a bunch of pissed off rednecks went in the
Mm-hmm.
woods and just scattered the woods with just scouted them and hunted because they're pissed. They're killing their livestock. That's their
Right.
food. That's their way of life. Do you think that kind of show of force would push them out the area, or do you think they come back stronger?
Depends on what their mentality is. I mean, if you've got one that's, of that mindset,
About
if it's that
three.
vindictive, you could chase it off, but it's going to come back. And then other ones, they might just leave.
That's something you would get from a top three
No, I wouldn't think so.
because they don't get that big.
They get big.
Oh, I'm
They
sorry.
can get up to
The
10 feet.
the sister's going to carry slugs out there. You
I
stick
recommend. I
after 10
recommend.
millimeter. I'm gonna have
Yep.
my slug. But go ahead, sir.
I recommend slugs. Well, you know
You
what?
know what?
You know what John Green told me
What?
this is back when I first met him. He says, "Do you have a 12 gauge pump shotgun?" And I said, "I do." He says, "What you want to do is load it with alternating buckshot and double up buck and slugs." He says the buckshot's for knockdown power, the slugs for killing power.
Someone from your team told me that back in 2019
Yeah, I believe that.
because I used to go out alone.
Don't
They
ever go alone. Never
No,
go alone.
sir. Listen. I don't have anything else to prove in my life. I proved what I had to prove when I was in law for. I have nothing else to prove to
Hmm.
anyone. So let's get to the History Channel. Let's go into
Okay,
that. They sought you out. They wanted what you had
they did.
worked for your whole life. That knowledge has to be a compliment. Has to be the ultimate compliment. Let's go into that in the episode and what you did.
Yeah, the lady who was a producer for that show, she contacted me, emailed, and we called. We got on the phone and we talked, and she was asking me about different people in the Bigfoot community. And of course, something I learned from Renee DeHinden and DeHinden cracked me up because we always teased him. Instead of the CIA, he was the DIA. He knew every piece of dirt on everybody.
That sounds like the old lady down the street, don't it?
And I got better than him because I got dirt on him too. And we can talk about that one in a minute. That's a good one. But
Yeah.
he so she was asking me about different people, and I was telling her what I was trying to steer her away from some of these people because I always liked the History Channel, and I thought they did good quality shows, and I thought if I could help, then I wanted to give them a good show. So after we talked a while, she's like, "Oh my gosh, I wish I'd have talked to you in the beginning because there were some people we wouldn't have put on here." So she says, "You were so helpful," and they, on the show, they actually put my covers of my first 3 books on there as a way to say thanks, for steering them in the right direction. And but it was very a very cordial, kind of a thing. And like with Knott's Berry Farm, they wanted to do something credible. They wanted to put it in, not this goofy light that a lot of shows do. And they were great. I mean, I'd actually did. I did not long after that, Sci-Fi contacted me, and Joe Rogan was doing a show at the time called Joe Rogan Questions Everything. So I talked to the producer of that show, and they flew me to Burbank, and it was crazy because they told me, I asked them, I said, "Well, how should I dress?" And for the History Channel, they didn't. Well, they did tell me how to dress. They told me what colors to wear and things like that because of the backgrounds and things. And that was a weird situation. I had to go to this. They rented a mansion, one of these old mansions in San Francisco, and they had a room. People were still living in the house, but they had a room set up, and it was all dark in there. And there was a guy off to my left, and I couldn't see him because the light was shining in my eyes, and it was black everywhere else. And he was telling me how to do these questions. So, and it was funny. I should mention too. At the same time, there was another show. All these things hit at one time. There was the show, the $10 million Bigfoot Bounty. So while I was waiting out in the kitchen to film my segment for the History Channel, I get a call from their casting people from that channel. And I don't remember what channel did this, Spike TV, I think. So the lady there says, well, we have this show coming up. And she briefly described it. She says, you were our number one overwhelming choice to be on this show. So we talked a little bit more. And the more I thought about it, they were saying, oh, yeah, we're going to have 9 teams and there are going to be this many people in team and they're going to run around and compete and look for Bigfoot evidence. Then they're going to bring it to this panel of judges. And I got thinking, well, who knows more about evidence than me in this subject? How come I'm not on the panel? So
Oh,
I start asking questions to myself. All these red flags start coming up. And I had just taken a job as a manager for I was the Northern California manager for this company. And I called my director of operations back east and I said, well, I don't feel comfortable asking for a leave of absence right now because I'm new with the company. She says, no, you can take off if you want to, no problem. And I said, well, I don't really want to because a bunch of red flags are coming up on this show. So I made excuses to the producers why I couldn't do that show. And then the History Channel, or not History of Sci-Fi, called and they wanted me to go to Burbank. And they told me to wear, a sport jacket and a tie and all this stuff. You're going to be in studio. Well, when I get to Burbank, they had a young guy, one of these associate producers, young guy out of college, come pick me up and drove me out to the Angeles National Forest out in the mountains. And I said, is there a studio out here? They told me to dress this way. No, we're going to be out in the woods. I'm like,
oh,
oh no. So, and I don't know if I've watched Joe Rogan much, but he's an interesting guy. The guy can fire questions so fast. He wanted to trudge off down this slope into the brush, and I'm watching all the way down, for rattlesnakes and all kinds of stuff going down there. And we get down a couple hundred yards down this slope, and he says, okay, we'll film here. And he starts asking me every question under the sun. And I'm batting him back, right back at him, answered all these questions as fast as he could ask them. And after when he was done filming, we filmed that for 2 hours. It was
in a
grueling.
suit in the woods.
Oh, it was grueling. It was hot. I had to take my jacket off. This guy's asking me a bazillion questions. And after he told the guy to turn the camera off, he says, he says, if I had the money, he says, you'd be the guy I would back financially to go out and prove these things are out there. And I tried contacting me afterwards. He says, yeah, get in touch with me. And the producer would never, put the information or forward it to him. So I'm like, okay, that's not going to happen.
Well,
But,
let me ask. Go
and
ahead.
they didn't use my segment after all.
That's because you probably told the hard truth on things. I don't
I
know. It
did.
seems like if they don't sell, they're not going to put it up.
What they did, they put I think it was 2 or 3 segments, I think, and they were all just goofy as heck. I mean, I thought, thank God they didn't put my piece with these people. These people are awful.
Okay. Do you think those shows contaminate the way people go in the woods and try to do research?
Oh, they do, especially like that particular one. Because these people were doing the go out and banging on trees and all this crazy stuff, and the stuff they said was just idiotic. I mean, they looked like backwoods hillbillies, and I'm thinking, well, now that's not the kind of people that are out here.
So, one question I didn't ask are vocals. Are they really good at mimicking things around them and in their environment?
They are sometimes very good, sometimes they're off, and it's funny. I chuckle sometimes. I've got a bunch of recordings that I've gotten from witnesses where it's really obvious, and things that I've heard myself in the field. The ones that are off, it's like they're really trying to copy something, but then it goes terribly wrong. but they
Yes,
do
I've heard
imitate.
that. So this is what I need you to do, Will.
Okay.
I need you to go look up Sean Ryan. Sean Ryan. Don't know if you
Okay.
ever heard of him. Sean Ryan.
No, not familiar.
He is like my spirit animal. Okay, Sean
Okay.
Ryan, great guy. He has people from the CIA on there. I mean, whistleblowers. Boom, boom, boom. You can tell him Victoria sent you. He don't know me, but tell him that anyway.
Okay.
When I get off of here, I'm actually going to go to his website and I'm going to put your information in there, and I'm going to tell him you need to contact this guy or you're going to lose out. And
Okay.
when you get on his show, I want you looking at camera and I want you to say, "Hey, Victoria, I made it to the Sean Ryan show." Okay.
You got
All
it.
right. He'll give you some gummy bears, but the
Oh,
guy is really good and he will, I mean, this guy is just, I got to send you a link to his channel. He
okay.
digs, he welcomes the truth. He is very, I mean, he goes into anything. I mean, this guy has some really serious people on there, and I don't think it would be at the level that you experience with Joe Rogan jumping in a brush. He's going to sit down and he's
Okay.
going to interview you for hours. And
hmm
I'm telling you, I'm gonna say, listen, Sean, you don't know me, buddy, but you need to do me a favor. So I'm gonna do that. And if you make it on that show, you look at that camera, you say, "Hey, Vicky," and I'm gonna be like, "Oh my God, okay."
You
I will
got
feel
it.
like, oh, okay, I'm gonna hold you to that. I have that recorded.
Oh, good. Good.
So let's go into this dirt digging business where you get stuff on each other.
Oh, well, this goes
Yeah, you know,
back.
I forgot.
This goes back. Now, you have to understand, Renee DeHinden and I were good friends for many years. Well, from 1975 until 2001 when he passed away. Um, but there were things, I talked to the old timers in the subject, and I'd gotten to know Mrs. Patterson. And this was back, in fact, my buddy Jack and I spent a lot of time going to the field together back in the 90s. And actually, when I was writing my first book, in fact, he's the reason I started writing books because he said after Renee passed away, he says, well, Renee's gone now. You're the only one left with that knows all that stuff. Uh, so anyway, going back to the early 90s, probably 10 years before Renee passed away, I went over to Jack's place one night after work, and we used to do a lot of planning and things that we created and stuff. So he says, he says, I looked up Mrs. Patterson's number. She still lives in Yakima, and I gave her a call. And he says, we hit it off. She's a really fun lady. And he says, she offered to sell you and me the Patterson film for $15,000, the rights to it. And of course, Jack and I, we didn't have to have a pot to pee in between the pair of us. So we weren't going to get $15,000 anywhere, but it was a nice offer. And he says, she wants to talk to you. She says, give her a call. So I called her, and we talked on the phone a few times after that. And she was great. And I had questions, because people always bring up stuff about Roger Patterson and, faking the film and all this stuff. And I asked her, I said, point blank, and I knew from my own, growing up and, camping and, not having a lot of money and going to the field without a lot of money. I said, now, my understanding was when they got the film, Roger was between jobs. And she says, yeah, they were construction workers. So, how construction workers are, they're out of work most of the time. So they were in between jobs and hoping to get something because they didn't have any money, him and Bob. So I said, well, how was he able to go to the field? She says, well, friends and family would give him $20, $30 here and there. And that's usually all they had. And I remember as a kid growing up, a family friend that used to take me camping and fishing with him, he'd spend $5. That's all it would cost to go fishing for a weekend. And that usually was for gas and, a little bit of, ingredients for coffee or whatever. And that was kind of it. So it made sense to me that they didn't need a lot of money to go and do things. But she was telling me one time that, Renee DeHinden, of course, and Renee told me this, that he and Patterson got to be business partners after Patterson got the film. And of course, when Patterson died in 72, Patterson had given him 60% copyright of the still photos. So after that, Renee badgered her constantly to get the other 40%. And finally, just to get rid of him, she gave in and gave him the other 40%. Well, the reason that was important was Renee didn't have a lot of money. I mean, he lived at the Vancouver Gun Club in exchange for doing chores and stuff around the gun club. And he would recycle shot from them shooting skeet in the peat bog. And he would fill up 55, taking the whole year to fill up 55-gallon drums. And then he would sell that back to the gun club for reloads at, I think, $500 a barrel. So that's how he would afford to go to Bluff Creek for 2 weeks every year. And that was his big financial part. So what he would get from the Patterson photos, if a magazine or somebody wanted to use the still photos, they'd have to pay him $600. So that was kind of a big thing. But for the video portion, Mrs. Patterson would get $2,500 per viewing. So he started badgering her for the film. And she'd always told him no. So one of these times he was coming back from Northern California. He called her and she decided, okay, I'll meet with you this time at my attorney's office. That's where the film, the original film, and the two surviving casts that Roger made that day. Roger had made 3 casts. One of them broke. So he still had a left and a right. And she had all that stuff. And you hear people to this day, they always say, well, the original film vanished. Well, it didn't vanish. And I know it didn't vanish because in the 80s, one of these trips to Renee's, I was up there and he showed me in his safe. He had the original film and those 2 casts. Well, she told me that during that particular trip, and I don't remember when this was, had to be late 70s, early 80s, I think it was, that she agreed to meet him in the attorney's office. Well, when she went to the attorney's office, apparently the film and these 2 casts were sitting on the attorney's desk. When she got there, they weren't there. And Renee never showed up.
Oh, man.
So it's just, nobody could pin it for sure on anybody, but I was the guy that he was showing all this stuff to, and he loaned me those 2 casts that we made molds from. So I know for sure he had the stuff.
Wow.
And then after Renee died, his stuff went to the wind. Nobody, he'd made so many enemies. Even his ashes sat in his old truck for a couple of weeks before somebody came and cleaned it out. So nobody knows. Yeah, nobody knows what happened to all that stuff.
That's probably going to be how my ashes turn up.
Nah, that never happened.
So let me ask, I'll be fine with it because I won't be around. But
That's right.
Let me ask you this. When you get to someone as old as Bob Gimlin that start getting threats based on somebody's misinterpretation or assumption, how does that make you feel?
Angry. I've talked to Bob a few times on the phone. I've never actually met in person. We've spoken on the phone a few times. And, he's somebody, I mean, he was, I told him, in fact, he wasn't even going to talk to anybody ever about that experience because he'd gotten kind of screwed over. And I think I'm the one that convinced him. I said, you need to get your recognition in this. Go out and talk to people. So he eventually did. And I thought that was great. I think people need to leave him alone though.
One of the things that got me is when that person said they come down with these huge 175-pound killer dogs. As someone that used to work dogs, it was probably a basic 70-pound German Shepherd that come in. And if you just even look at simple things like that, you took someone's life, you really, I mean, people in the Bigfoot community are funny, and they could be very high strung and dangerous.
Oh yeah, there's some crackpots out there.
if you can't get the description of a basic German Shepherd and a weight down, then I'm sorry, you lost just something that small, you've lost credibility, and that's all I'm going to say on that. But the thing is, when you look back on your life, two questions. Then I want to end it with going through your books, and of
Hmm.
course, you can have a tribute at the end of this one. Going back on your life, you've had a really, you were destined to do what you were doing from it. I mean, I think your first incident was 1972. It is
Yeah.
going, it's 2024 now. You've had highs and lows, but what have been some of those highs and lows? And then I'll go let you answer that, and we'll go into your last question.
The lows, I'd start with those, I think would be some of the really um, disreputable people that I've dealt with. You go into situations thinking that this is a great person, and then um, they turn around, you turn around, they've got a knife in your back for no reason other than they're trying to climb on you to get somewhere in this topic. And I'm thinking, that's totally unnecessary. You learn from those things, and then the highs, um, geez, it's almost embarrassing. When I've had people contact me, and you can tell they're starstruck. I'm thinking, well, I'm just the guy next door. I'm not anybody, but they appreciate what you do. And that's the best compliment you can ever get. I think when somebody says, wow, I really enjoyed what you did or what you said.
So, if you could sum up your life story in a sentence or in a couple of sentences, looking back on it, what would that be?
I guess it's analogous to a roller coaster. you know, Ups and downs, left, right. You don't know where you're going, where things are. I mean, it's been an adventure. That's all I can say. And I use that saying one time in my book. As a um, I've lost the term, but when you're going to give a quote to somebody, it's for all those who seek knowledge and adventure. I mean, that's kind of what it's been.
I would say it was probably a well worn path to the mountain of wisdom. That's
Yeah,
my
definitely.
poetic side, sir. That's your poem for tonight.
Well, I appreciate that.
Well, when I become famous, I'll put it on a postcard for you. But I think it was really good. A well worn path to the mountain of wisdom, and I think you teamed up with some good people. Um, I think that you've given advice and direction. I mean, you didn't even know me, and but even it took you 3 days to get an answer on a footprint, and you benefited nothing from that other than to give me direction. And everything you said, right straight down to the environment that we would probably find them in, was correct based on that footprint.
I
And
try
that
to do my best, to help people if I can.
Well, that was very correct, and you were right on it. So let's go down your work and your books, and let's get them out there. They will be in the description when I'll put everything together. But let's go through your books where they can find them, and we'll give you a final tribute. And I hope to have you back after that sometime.
Oh, absolutely. The books they're on Amazon, but you can also go to my website, williamjevning.com, and there's links in there. And then we have creekdevil.com website, and I think there's links there also.
And you have a podcast.
And I do. It's on YouTube. I've tried, because I'm still in the middle of moving. I haven't done anything with Spotify or Podbean for a little while, but I'll get back to that. But for now, it's the main one is YouTube, and it's actually you can go to either type my name to look for it or Creek Devil, and it'll come up. And we have
Well,
over 750 videos up there so far.
yeah, I was going through those the other day, and I was like, oh my goodness, that's a lot of work.
Apparently, we like to talk.
You know what? I like good conversation, which is why I was telling you before we started recording. I think I'm going to get back to the basics of telling the story behind the person behind the story.
I think that's a good idea.
I think I will do that. If you know some good candidates, just send them my way.
I
So
sure will.
I appreciate it. At the end of every chat, I don't want to call them interviews, but at the end of every episode, I know you did a tribute last night. Is there any particular person you would like to give a tribute to?
Well, we lost our good friend Tom recently, so I'd like to, give a tribute to him. Tom was a great guy, and he's on a lot of the shows. So, my hat's definitely off to him.
That's really hard when you lose someone good in a community that's also your friend.
It sure is.
Will, I have enjoyed it. I will send you the episode as soon as it goes up. And I have really, really enjoyed it. And I really like the fact that I was able to get back to the basics of what I intended my channel to be. I look forward to staying in touch. And I want you to give Puppy a pat on the head for me.
I will certainly do that. Thank you so much.
All right. You take care, Will.
All right. You too, Vicki.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.